The night the Marquess of Ashfordly disappeared, the snow in Kensington Square lay unmarked and perfect, and it was this, the very perfection of that white expanse, which first drew my friend's peculiar and untiring attention. I have set down in these pages many of the singular problems which it was my privilege to observe Mr. Sherlock Holmes unravel, but I confess that few have troubled my sleep so long or taught me so much of the strange arithmetic of the human heart as the affair which I have come to think of as the vanishing of the Lord of Kensington Square. It was the 3rd week of January in the year 1888, and London lay beneath one of those hard, still frosts which now and again descend upon the city and hush it into a semblance of the country. For 2 days the snow had fallen, and then upon the 3rd the sky had cleared to a pitiless blue, and the whole of the town glittered under a sun that gave light without warmth. I had risen late, my old Afghan wound aching in the cold as it was wont to do, and had come down to find Holmes already at the window of our sitting room in Baker Street, wrapped in his mouse-colored dressing gown, a cup of coffee cooling untouched at his elbow. "You have not slept, Holmes," said I. "Sleep is a habit of the unoccupied mind, Watson," he answered without turning. "And mine, for these 10 days past, has been most cruelly unoccupied. London has grown virtuous, or at least dull, which for my purposes amounts to the same thing. Not a forged check, not a poisoned ant, not so much as a respectable burglary. I begin to think the criminal classes have taken the frost as an excuse for a holiday. I had learned long ago to let these black moods run their course, and so I took up my paper and my breakfast and said no more. But I had scarcely buttered my toast when there came a violent peal at the bell below, followed by the sound of a heavy tread upon the stair, and the door was flung open to admit a gentleman in such evident distress that he did not so much as remove his hat before speaking. He was a man of perhaps 55, tall and spare, dressed in the sober black of a family of consequence, with a face that had once been handsome and was now furrowed by anxiety and want of sleep. His gray side whiskers were disordered, his gloves clutched crumpled in one hand, and his eyes held that particular wildness which I have observed in men who have looked upon something they cannot understand and cannot bear. "Mr. Holmes," he cried, "you must help me. I have come straight from Kensington. My master has vanished from a locked room, from a house watched on every side, and there is not a footprint in the snow to say which way he went. It is not natural, sir. I tell you it is not natural." "Pray compose yourself and take that chair," said Holmes, whose whole languid manner had dropped from him in an instant, as a cloak drops from the shoulders. His gray eyes had grown keen and bright. "Watson, a glass of brandy for our visitor. Now, sir, you will tell me everything from the beginning, and you will omit nothing, however trivial it may seem to you. The name of your master, first of all." The gentleman drank the brandy gratefully, and some color returned to his cheeks. "My name is Josiah Pemberton," he said. "I have been butler and, latterly, steward to the household of the most honorable the Marquess of Ashfordly these 30 years. It is his lordship who has disappeared, Lord Ashfordly himself, Charles Ravensmere, the 4th of that title. He was seen last upon the evening of the day before yesterday, the 17th, and this morning his bed has not been slept in. His door was locked from within, and he is nowhere to be found. And the snow, Mr. Holmes, the snow about the house is as smooth as a tablecloth." Holmes had settled himself in his chair, his fingertips pressed together, his eyes half closed. Let us proceed with method, he said. Describe to me the house. It stands upon the north side of Kensington Square, sir. A great old house of the reign of Queen Anne, set a little back from its neighbors, with a strip of garden before it enclosed by iron railings and a further garden behind, walled all about to a height of some 10 feet. His lordship's private apartments are upon the first floor at the rear. A bedchamber, a dressing room, and a study, all connected, and the study looks out upon the walled garden behind. And the doors and windows of these rooms. The bedchamber has but one door, which gives upon the passage. That door was locked upon the inside. We broke it in this morning. The windows of all 3 rooms were fastened, and the snow upon the sills was unbroken. Nothing had passed out that way. Nothing could have without leaving its mark. You are certain the door was locked from within. The key was in the lock upon the inner side, sir. When we forced the door, it fell to the floor within the room. I saw it with my own eyes. Holmes opened his eyes. That is a detail of the first importance. Continue. When was his lordship last seen, and by whom? By me, Mr. Holmes, and by his valet, Timpson. On the evening of the 17th, his lordship dined alone, as had become his custom of late. He was, I must be frank with you, he was not himself. For some weeks he had been sunk in a great melancholy, silent and short of temper, keeping much to his rooms. That night he ate little. Afterward he went up to his study, and at about 10:30 he rang for Timpson and asked to be undressed for bed. Timpson left him at 11. His lordship said, here the old man's voice faltered. His lordship said, "Good night, Timpson. I fancy I shall sleep the sounder tonight than I have this long while." And then he locked the door, for Timpson heard the bolt shot as he went down the passage. That was the last that any living soul saw or heard of him. And in the morning, his lordship was accustomed to ring at 8. When 9 o'clock came and no bell had sounded, I grew uneasy and went up myself. I knocked, there was no answer. I called, there was silence. At last, being greatly alarmed, I fetched Timpson and one of the footmen, and we broke in the door. The room was empty, Mr. Holmes. The bed had been lain in but not slept in. The coverlet was but a little disturbed. His lordship's night-clothes were gone, and so was he. The window fastened, the snow without untouched. It was as though he had melted into the air. Holmes was silent for a time, his brows drawn down. Was anything taken? Money, papers, valuables? Nothing that we can discover, save the clothes he stood in, or rather lay in. His purse, his watch, his signet ring, all remain upon the dressing table. His clothes hang in the press. He went, if he went at all, in his nightshirt and dressing gown, in the dead of a January night, into snow a foot deep. It is madness, sir. It is certainly interesting, said Holmes, and I saw the old fire of the chase kindle in him. Now, Mr. Pemberton, tell me of the household. Who dwells beneath that roof? The butler collected himself. There is his lordship, was his lordship, a widower these 12 years. There is his son and heir, the Viscount Ravensmere, the Honorable Gerald, a young gentleman of 26. There is his lordship's younger brother, Mr. Sebastian Ravensmere, who has resided with the family for some 3 years past. There is Lady Cranston, his lordship's sister, a widow who keeps house for him. And there is Miss Alice Fenn, who was companion to Lady Cranston and reader to his lordship, his eyes having grown weak of late. Below stairs there is myself, Timson the valet, the cook, 3 maids, 2 footmen, and the coachman, who lodges above the stables. A full house. And which of these were at home upon the night of the 17th? All, sir, save the coachman, who had leave to visit his mother at Richmond, and did not return till the following noon. The family dined together, all but his lordship, who dined alone in his study, as I have said. Now attend to me closely, said Holmes, leaning forward. This melancholy of his lordship's, when did it begin, and had it any known cause? Pemberton hesitated, and I marked the hesitation, for it was the first check in a narrative that had until then flowed freely. It began, I should say, some 2 months since. As to the cause, Mr. Holmes, I am a servant, and it is not my place to speak of the family's affairs. Your master has vanished and may be dead, said Holmes gravely. There is no longer any place for such delicacy. I must know all, or I can do nothing. The old man bowed his head. You are right, sir. Forgive me. The truth is that there had been much dissension in the house of late. His lordship and the young Viscount, his son, had quarreled bitterly. There were debts, gaming debts, I fear, on Mr. Gerald's part, and his lordship had threatened to alter his will and to cut the entail where he could. Words were spoken between them that a father and son should never speak. And there was besides, he stopped again, besides, there was the matter of Miss Fenn. It was whispered, I say only whispered, that his lordship, though a man near 60, had formed an attachment to the young lady, who is not above 22. Lady Cranston was most bitterly opposed to it, and Mr. Sebastian, his lordship's brother, he too, the butler spread his hands. There were currents beneath the surface of that house, Mr. Holmes, which I did not understand and did not wish to. But they ran deep and they ran dark. Holmes rose from his chair and paced twice across the room. You have done well to tell me, he said. One question more. Who first suggested that there was anything, shall we say, unnatural in this disappearance? You used the word yourself more than once. Pemberton looked at him with troubled eyes. It is the talk of the servants' hall, sir. There is an old story of the house, a legend, if you will, that the first Marquess who built it made away with himself in that very room, and that the family is cursed, and that when a Ravensmere is about to die he vanishes first and is seen no more. I do not believe such tales, Mr. Holmes. And yet the room was locked, and the snow was unbroken, and my master is gone. Curses, said Holmes dryly, are the last refuge of the unimaginative and the first weapon of the guilty. Watson, will you come? I think a morning in Kensington will do us both more good than this fire. Mr. Pemberton, we will follow you within the half-hour. Say nothing to the household of my profession. Describe me, if you must, as a friend of the family come to offer counsel. When the butler had gone, Holmes stood for a moment gazing into the fire. What do you make of it, Watson? It is a most extraordinary business, said I. A man vanishing from a locked room, leaving no track in the snow. I confess I can see no natural way of it. No more can I as yet, said he, and that is precisely why I am content. The impossible, Watson, is merely the possible whose method we have not yet perceived. When a thing appears to defy nature, we may be very sure that some man has been at pains to make it appear so. Come, the game is a good one, and I would not lose the scent while it is warm. We wrapped ourselves against the cold and set out. The cab bore us westward through streets where the snow, so pure in Kensington's quiet square, had been churned to a brown and sordid slush beneath the wheels of commerce. The park lay white and silent to our right as we passed along its edge, the bare trees etched black against the sky. Holmes sat silent, his chin sunk upon his breast, and I knew better than to break in upon his thoughts. Kensington Square, when we reached it, was indeed a place apart, a green oasis of the last century, its tall brick houses looking down with a grave and faded dignity upon the enclosed garden at its center, where the snow lay smooth and glittering. The house of the Marquess of Ashfordly stood at the northern side, larger and older than its fellows, its many windows dark. A constable stood at the gate, stamping his feet against the cold, and beside him, to my surprise, I recognized the wiry figure and rat-like face of our old acquaintance, Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. "Ah, Mr. Holmes," cried Lestrade, with the mixture of condescension and relief which he ever displayed toward my friend. "I might have known you would be drawn to a thing like this. A pretty puzzle, is it not? A peer of the realm vanished into thin air, and not a mark to show for it. Good morning, Lestrade. I see you have been busy. You have walked twice round the house through the garden, and you have leaned for some time against the wall beneath the study window, doubtless in deep cogitation." Lestrade stared. "Now how in the world? The snow, my dear Lestrade, is a most eloquent witness. Your official boots have left their record for any man to read. But we shall come to the snow presently. What is your theory?" The inspector drew himself up. "My theory, Mr. Holmes, is that there is no mystery here at all, save the mystery of a guilty conscience. His lordship was a broken man, melancholy, quarrelsome, deep in family trouble. In my judgment, he rose in the night, unfastened his window, which was found fastened. He refastened it behind him by some trick, and made away over the garden wall to drown himself in the Serpentine, or to take ship, or to hide himself where shame could not follow. Suicides do strange things, sir. The snow is a difficulty, I grant you, but snow can be brushed and can drift, and I do not doubt we shall find the answer plain enough when the man's body turns up, as such bodies always do." "An admirable theory," said Holmes. "With but a single flaw, it takes no account of the facts. But let us not quarrel upon the doorstep. Show me the room." We were admitted by Pemberton and passed through a great hall, cold and dim, hung with the dark portraits of dead Ravensmeres, and up a broad oaken staircase to the first floor. The passage above was long and carpeted, lit at its far end by a tall window through which the winter sun fell in a pale bar across the floor. Before a heavy door, its lock splintered and hanging, a small knot of persons stood gathered, and these I understood to be the family. Holmes, with a word, begged them to remain a moment while he examined the room, and I had leisure to observe them. Foremost stood a young man whom I took at once for the Viscount Ravensmere. He was tall and well-made, with the dark, handsome features of his race, but there was a looseness about his mouth and a restlessness in his fine eyes that spoke of a nature not wholly master of itself. He was pale, and his hand, as he raised it to his lip, trembled slightly. Beside him stood a lady of some 50 years, upright and severe, dressed in rich mourning-colored silk, her gray hair drawn back beneath a widow's cap, her mouth a thin, hard line. This, I did not doubt, was Lady Cranston. A little apart from them stood a gentleman of perhaps 50, sleek and full-fleshed, with a florid face and small watchful eyes, Mr. Sebastian Ravensmere, the brother. And in the shadow of the window, half turned away, stood a young woman in gray, slight and pale, with a quantity of soft brown hair and a countenance of singular sweetness, though drawn now with weeping. This could be none other than Miss Alice Fenn. Holmes disappeared into the room, and I with him. It was a large, well-appointed bedchamber, paneled in old oak, with a great curtained bed against the inner wall, a marble fireplace in which the ashes of a fire lay gray and dead, and a single tall window, deeply recessed, looking out upon the walled garden behind. To the left, a door, standing open, communicated with the dressing-room, and beyond that, I was told, lay the study. The bed, as Pemberton had said, was but lightly disturbed. The coverlet had been turned down and a hollow pressed in the pillow, but no man had passed the night beneath those sheets. Upon the dressing-table lay a gold watch, a purse, a heavy signet ring, and a pair of spectacles. Holmes stood in the center of the room, and his eyes traveled slowly over every surface. Then, with the swift, silent energy of a hound that has caught the scent, he was upon his knees by the window, then at the fireplace, then at the door. He examined the broken lock with his glass. He studied the key, which lay upon a small table where it had been placed after the door was forced. He peered up the chimney. He ran his fingers along the sills and the wainscot. For a long while he said nothing, and I knew that his mind was working with that furious concentration which he could summon at will. "The window," he said at last. "Lestrade, you say it was found fastened. By whom?" "By the butler and the valet, in my presence this morning." "The catch was down, sir, and see here." He pointed to the sill without. "The snow upon the ledge lies smooth and unbroken. No man went out that way in the night." Holmes threw up the sash and leaned far out. The wall of the house dropped sheer to the garden, a good 25 feet, and the snow below lay white and pure, save where Lestrade's own tracks marred it near the base of the wall. To the right and left, the windows of the other rooms showed their ledges likewise heaped with untouched snow. Above, the eaves and a stretch of steep-pitched roof. "You perceive," said Lestrade with satisfaction, "there is no drain-pipe, no creeper, no ledge by which a man might climb. And the snow below is unmarked. He did not go out of the window." "I perceive it very clearly," said Holmes. He drew in his head and stood thoughtful. "The snow ceased to fall at what hour, do you know?" "The constable on the beat says it stopped about 2 in the morning, Lestrade answered. 2 in the morning, Holmes repeated softly. "That is worth remembering." He turned to the fireplace and once more examined the dead ashes, sifting them gently through his fingers. Then he rose, dusted his hands, and said, "I have seen enough of this room for the present. Let us speak with the household." We returned to the passage, and Holmes addressed himself first, with grave courtesy, to Lady Cranston. "Madam, I am aware that this is a house of grief, and I would not intrude upon it were the matter not one of the gravest urgency. You are his lordship's sister." "I am," said the lady, in a voice as cold and level as the winter air. "And I will tell you at once, sir, that I regard this bringing in of detectives as a needless indignity. My brother has taken his own life. He was a man cruelly used, by his son, by his own folly, by a designing person beneath this very roof. He sought the only peace left to him. Let his memory rest. You seem very certain of his death, madam, for one who has seen no body. The thin lips tightened. I know my brother, sir. And you, my lord, said Holmes, turning to the young Viscount. You quarreled with your father, I understand. The young man flushed darkly. Who told you that? Yes, we quarreled. What of it? A man may quarrel with his father and not murder him. And there is no murder here. You have seen for yourself, the room was locked and empty. He broke off and passed his hand across his brow. I do not know what has become of my father, Mr. Sir. I wish to God I did. Where were you upon the night of the 17th, between 11 and 2? In my own chamber, asleep, alone. A gentleman is generally alone in his chamber at night, said the Viscount, with a flash of temper. Just so. And you, Mr. Ravensmere. Holmes turned his mild gaze upon the brother. Sebastian Ravensmere spread his plump hands in a gesture of easy candor. I, sir. I sat up late over a book in the library upon the ground floor, and retired, I should think, near 1 o'clock. I heard nothing, saw nothing. My poor brother's melancholy was known to us all. I fear my sister is right, and that his mind gave way beneath his troubles. A tragedy, sir, a very great tragedy. His voice was smooth and sorrowful, yet I could not rid myself of the impression that the small eyes above the sorrowful mouth were bright and calculating. Last of all, Holmes came to Miss Fenn, and his manner softened. You were his lordship's reader, I understand. You knew him, perhaps, more nearly than most in these last unhappy weeks. Can you tell me anything of his state of mind? The young woman lifted her eyes to his, and I saw that they were brimming, yet steady. His lordship was very unhappy, sir, she said in a low, sweet voice. But he was not mad, whatever they may say. And, she hesitated, glancing at Lady Cranston, he did not seem to me a man about to take his own life. On the last evening when I read to him, he spoke of the future. He spoke of a journey he meant to take, of setting his affairs in order and beginning afresh. Those are not the words of a man who means to die. They are not, said Holmes quietly. I thank you, Miss Fenn. You have told me more than you know. Lady Cranston made a sharp movement. The girl is overwrought and does not know what she says. Mr. Holmes, I must insist. You need insist upon nothing, madam, said Holmes with a bow. I have very nearly done. I would ask only that the room above be left precisely as it is, and that no member of the household leave Kensington Square until I give leave. Come, Watson. We took our leave, and Lestrade walked with us to the gate. Well, Mr. Holmes, said he with a knowing look. You'll admit it's suicide now, I fancy. The girl's story is all moonshine. A designing hussy who hoped to marry a marquess and now sees her fine plans in ruins. The man drowned himself, mark my words. You may be right, Lestrade, said Holmes. Yet I should be glad if you would drag the Serpentine and set inquiries afoot at the railway stations and the docks, for form's sake. And, Lestrade, one small favor. Ascertain for me, if you can, the exact hour at which the snow began to fall upon the evening of the 17th, as well as when it ceased. The meteorological record, or the word of the constables on the beat, will serve. Snow, you and your snow, grumbled Lestrade. What has the hour of the snow to do with a suicide? "Everything, perhaps," said Holmes, "or nothing. Good day." As our cab rattled back toward Baker Street, I could contain myself no longer. "Holmes, this is beyond me. A man cannot pass through a fastened window without disturbing the snow, nor through a door locked upon the inside. And yet he is gone. What can it mean?" Holmes leaned back with half-closed eyes. "It means, Watson, that our attention has been very cleverly directed. Consider the essential features of the problem. We are asked to believe that a man vanished from a sealed room, leaving no trace. When a thing is presented to us as impossible, we should ask ourselves not how was the impossible achieved, but rather who wishes me to believe that the impossible occurred, and why. A locked room, Watson, is not a mystery of physics. It is a mystery of psychology. Someone has built us a puzzle, and the shape of the puzzle tells us much about the hand that built it. But the snow, Holmes, the untouched snow. Ah, the snow, yes." He smiled faintly. "You noticed, I hope, the several small points of interest which the room afforded." "I confess I noticed nothing beyond what Lestrade pointed out." "Then let us review them. First, the key. It lay upon the inner side of the door, and fell to the floor within the room when the door was forced. Lestrade takes this as proof that the door was locked from within by the vanished man. But consider, the door opens inward. Had the key been in the lock, turned, when the door was burst, it would have been struck by the door as it flew open and cast a good way into the room, or bent, or snapped. Instead, it lay close by the threshold, upon the near side. A trifle, but trifles are my province." "You mean the door was not locked from within at all?" "I mean that the appearance of its being so locked was contrived. There are more ways than one to turn a key in a lock from the wrong side of a door, Watson, with a length of string, or a pair of fine pincers, or a strip of whalebone. But we go too fast. The second point, the bed. It had been lain in but not slept in, the coverlet turned down, a hollow in the pillow and no more. A man who retires to rest and sleeps does not leave his bed so. But a man or another, who wishes it to appear that the bed was used and has but a moment for the work, leaves it precisely so. Good heavens! A third, the fire. It was dead and gray when we saw it, which is natural enough after 2 nights. But among the ashes, Watson, I found the small scorched fragments of what had once been paper. A good deal of paper, burned not in the ordinary way of an evening's fire, but heaped and consumed all at once. Someone destroyed documents in that room. And fourth, and most suggestive of all, the window. But the window was fastened, and the snow beneath unbroken. You saw it yourself." "I saw it." "And I saw also, Watson, what you did not, that the snow upon the outer sill of that window lay smooth and level, without so much as the pockmark of a single flake having fallen upon it out of its natural place, whereas the sills of the neighboring windows and every ledge and coping in that garden bore the faint dimpled surface which fresh-fallen snow always shows, and which the wind roughens further as it settles. The snow on our window-sill, Watson, was too perfect. It had been smoothed, laid or pressed or brushed level by a human hand, and then left to freeze. That is the one thing that fresh, wind-blown snow never is, perfectly smooth." I stared at him in astonishment. "Then someone did pass through that window." "Someone passed through that window," said Holmes, "and afterward took great pains to restore the snow upon the sill to an appearance of untouched purity, not knowing, for it is a subtle thing, that the very perfection of his handiwork would betray him to a careful eye. That and the hour at which the snow ceased to fall. Do you not see the significance of it now? I fear I do not. And the snow stopped at 2 in the morning. Timson left his master at 11 and heard the bolt shot. Now, if the window was used, and the snow upon the sill afterwards smoothed by hand, that smoothing must have been done after the snow had ceased to fall. For had it been done while snow was still falling, fresh flakes would have settled upon it and roughened it once more before morning. Therefore the window was used, and the traces disguised at some time after 2 o'clock in the morning. And that, Watson, is a fact of the very first importance, for it tells us that whatever befell the Lord of Kensington Square, it did not befall him at 11, when he bade Timson good night, but in the small hours of the morning, when the whole household should have been abed. But how could a man climb down 25 feet of sheer wall, and back again, and smooth the snow behind him? He could not, said Holmes, and there we touch the heart of it. He could not have done these things going down. But going up, that is another matter. Suppose, Watson, that the traffic through that window was not outward and downward, but inward and upward. Suppose that someone came to that window from without, from above, and returned the same way, and smoothed the sill as a last precaution. The eaves are not far above the window. A man upon the roof with a rope, he broke off and shook his head. But I speculate ahead of my facts, which is a capital error. We want more data. Tomorrow we shall have them. The following morning brought a note from Lestrade, which Holmes read aloud with a dry smile. The Serpentine had been dragged, and had yielded nothing but an old boot and a quantity of weed. No man answering the Marquess's description had been seen at any station or dock. And, here Holmes paused, the snow had begun to fall upon the evening of the 17th at about 9 o'clock, had fallen heavily till near 2 in the morning, and had then ceased, the sky clearing before dawn. Excellent, Lestrade, said Holmes. He has confirmed the one point I most desired. Now, Watson, I have certain inquiries of my own to pursue this day, of a kind for which I shall not need your company. I would ask you, if you will, to return alone to Kensington Square, and to make yourself agreeable to the household. Talk with them, listen. Above all, observe. I am particularly desirous to know more of the young Viscount's debts, of Mr. Sebastian's circumstances, and of the true nature of the feeling between his lordship and Miss Fenn. You have a gift, Watson, for winning the confidence of the troubled, which I sadly lack. Use it. I set out accordingly, and spent the better part of that day in the great cold house in Kensington Square. I will not weary the reader with the whole of my inquiries, but certain things I learned which bore afterward upon the solution, and these I will set down. From Pemberton, who had come to trust me, I learned the particulars of the Viscount's debts. They were heavy, some £8,000, owed chiefly to gaming acquaintances of doubtful character, and his lordship had refused, upon the last occasion, to pay a farthing of them, declaring that his son should learn the value of money though it beggared him. There had been a fearful scene, not a fortnight since, in which the young man had been heard to cry out that his father's death would be the saving of him. He did not mean it, sir, said the old butler earnestly. It was the wildness of a desperate boy. But it was overheard, and I fear it will go hard with him. From one of the maids, a garrulous girl, I gathered the gossip of the servants' hall concerning Mr. Sebastian. It appeared that this gentleman, the Marquess's younger brother, was without fortune of his own, having run through his patrimony in his youth, and lived entirely upon his brother's bounty. He had come to reside in the house 3 years before, ostensibly to assist his lordship in the management of the estates, and had made himself indispensable in that office, so that all the family's business now passed through his hands. "A very pleasant-spoken gentleman, sir," said the maid, "but there's them below stairs as says he's not to be trusted with the accounts, and that his lordship had been asking sharp questions of late about where the rents were going." This last struck me as suggestive, and I noted it carefully to lay before Holmes. But it was my interview with Miss Fenn which moved me most, and which I set down here at some length, for I came to see afterward how much it signified. I found the young lady alone in a small morning room, pale and composed, though the marks of grief were on her. When I had made known my errand, for I did not conceal that I came upon Holmes's behalf, she looked at me with a directness that was almost startling in one so young and so gently bred. "You wish to know, sir, whether it is true that his lordship loved me," she said. "You need not fear to ask it. Yes, it is true. And I will tell you what none in this house will believe, that I did not encourage it and that I refused him." "You refused him?" said I, in some astonishment. "A marquess and a great fortune." She smiled a little sadly. "I am poor, Doctor Watson, and alone in the world, and I know very well what the world would say. But I could not marry where I did not love, and I did not love his lordship. I honored him, he was the kindest of masters, and in these last weeks the most unhappy of men, but I could not be his wife. I told him so, gently, upon the very evening before he vanished. And do you know what he said to me?" Her voice trembled. "He said, 'Then I must find my happiness in seeing you happy, my dear, though it be with another.' And he told me that he had made provision for me in his will, a sum that would keep me from want all my days, so that I might be free to choose where my heart led me. Those are not the words of a man about to destroy himself, Dr. Watson. They are the words of a man who had, at last, found a kind of peace. I was much affected by this, and by the evident sincerity of the girl, and I said as much. But even as I did so, a cold thought crossed my mind. For if the Marquess had indeed altered his will to provide for Miss Fenn, and to disinherit or reduce his profligate son, then here were two persons, the son, and perhaps the brother who managed the money, to whom his death, before that will could be witnessed and secured, might be worth a very great deal. I kept these reflections to myself, and took my leave with many expressions of sympathy. Returning to Baker Street as the early winter dusk was falling and the lamplighters were going their rounds, I found Holmes stretched upon the sofa, wreathed in the blue smoke of his pipe, his eyes upon the ceiling. He heard my report in silence, only now and then interjecting a sharp question. When I told him of the altered will, and of Miss Fenn's account of his lordship's last words to her, he sat up. "That is capital, Watson. You have done admirably. The altered will is the pivot upon which the whole affair may turn. Now let me tell you what my own day has brought forth, for I too have not been idle." He knocked out his pipe. "I have spent the afternoon first at Somerset House, and afterward in the offices of Messrs. Hargreave and Whitton, who are or were the solicitors to the house of Ashfordly. I learned there a most illuminating thing. His lordship did indeed summon his solicitor, some 10 days before his disappearance, and gave instructions for the drawing of a new will, a will which cut down the provision to his son, made a handsome settlement upon Miss Fenn, and, most significantly of all, removed his brother Sebastian entirely from the management of the estates, and appointed an outside trustee in his place. That will, Watson, was drawn up. It was engrossed. It wanted only his lordship's signature, and the presence of 2 witnesses to become law. And the appointment was fixed. The solicitor was to have called at the house to obtain that signature upon the morning of the 18th of January. The very morning he was found to have vanished. The very morning. You perceive the exquisite timing. Had his lordship lived but a few hours more, that will would have been signed, and 3 persons under that roof would have found their expectations grievously diminished. His death or his disappearance, upon the night before and before the new will could be executed, meant that the old will stood. The will under which the son inherited all, encumbered though he was, and under which the brother remained master of the family's purse. Motive, Watson. We have motive in abundance. What we now require is method and the man. Then you believe he was murdered. I am nearly sure of it. But I must have proof, and I must understand the method to the last particular, for we are dealing with an adversary of no common cunning. Consider what has been achieved. A man is done away with. His body is spirited from a room upon the 1st floor. The room is made to appear as though he had retired peacefully to rest and locked himself in. The window by which the body was removed is disguised, and the whole is dressed up, with the aid of an old family legend, to suggest a supernatural vanishing or a suicide. It is a masterpiece of misdirection. And yet, Watson, it has one weakness, one fatal weakness, which its author could not avoid. Where is the body? You said it was taken out through the window. I said it was taken through the window. I did not say where it went afterward. A body, Watson, is a most inconvenient thing. It cannot be carried far through a snowbound city without leaving a trail. It cannot be buried in frozen ground. It cannot be burned without a great fire and a great stench, which would rouse a household. And yet it has vanished as completely as the man himself. The body, my dear fellow, is still to be found, and I fancy it has not traveled so very far from Kensington Square. Tomorrow we shall look for it. But first there is one experiment I wish to make, and for that I shall need the cover of darkness and the assistance of my faithful Watson. Are you willing to spend a cold hour or 2 this night in the garden of a great house, in a cause that may be dangerous? You know that I am, said I. Good old Watson. Then let us dine and rest and be ready. At midnight we go hunting in the snow. It wanted a few minutes of 1 o'clock in the morning when Holmes and I, having gained entrance to the rear garden of the Ashfordly house by an arrangement with the trusty Pemberton, stood together in the black shadow of the wall, our breath smoking in the bitter air, and gazed up at the dark bulk of the house above us. The moon rode high and clear, and by its light the walled garden lay revealed, a long, narrow enclosure, its central plot of snow now much trampled by the police and the household, but its margins, close under the walls and beneath the shrubs, still white and smooth. Above us, 25 feet up, I could make out the deep recess of the study and bedchamber windows, and above these again the overhang of the eaves and the steep slope of the roof, silvered with snow. Now, Watson, whispered Holmes, consider the problem afresh here upon the ground where it was worked. The body was taken from the bedchamber window. It could not go downward, for the wall is sheer and the snow below. Here, where we stand, was unbroken on the morning of discovery. Therefore it went upward to the roof. But a body cannot be flung up to a roof. It must be drawn up, and by more than one pair of hands, or by a hand of unusual strength, aided by a rope and pulley. Look yonder. He directed my gaze to the eaves directly above the window, and, following the line of his pointing finger by the moonlight, I made out a small iron bracket or hook projecting from beneath the overhang, such a fixture as might once have carried a lamp, or a pulley for the raising of goods to an attic. Oh, you see it. A hoisting hook, Watson, doubtless as old as the house and long disused. Over that hook a rope might be passed. A man upon the roof, or leaning from the attic window above, might lower a rope to a confederate below. Or, more simply, the thing might be done by one strong man alone, working from within the attic. The body is bound, the rope passed over the hook, and the burden drawn up hand over hand to the roof or to the attic window. And once upon the roof or within the attic, Watson, why, then it might lie hidden a long while in a house so vast and so little frequented in its upper stories. Come. We must gain the attic, and we must do so without rousing the house. Pemberton has left the servants' stair unbarred. We crept in by a low door, and up flight after flight of narrow, uncarpeted stairs, until we came out at last beneath the very roof, in a long, low garret that ran the whole depth of the house, cluttered with the discarded furniture and lumber of generations. The moonlight fell in slanting bars through the dusty dormer windows. Holmes moved noiselessly among the shrouded shapes, his dark lantern throwing its little disk of yellow light this way and that. At the end of the garret, above the position, as I judged, of the murdered man's bedchamber, was a dormer window that gave upon the roof, and near it, in the deep angle of the eaves, a great old sea-chest, iron-bound. Holmes went to it swiftly and threw back the lid. It was empty, but as he passed his lantern along the interior, I saw his face grow very grave. "Too late, Watson," he said in a low voice. "The bird has flown, or rather the burden has been shifted. But not, I think, long ago, and not without leaving its mark." He held the lantern close, and I saw upon the wood of the chest a dark stain, and caught, even in that cold air, the faint, dreadful odor that told its own tale. He lay here, Watson. Here the Lord of Kensington Square was hidden away, drawn up through yonder window from below, while the household believed him vanished by enchantment. But someone has moved him. Someone grew afraid and has sought a safer grave. And that means, Watson, that our murderer has taken alarm, that he knows or fears that the truth is closing upon him. We must move quickly now, or he will cover his tracks beyond recovery. At that instant there came, from somewhere below us in the sleeping house, a sound, the faint, unmistakable creak of a stair tread under a stealthy foot. Holmes's hand closed upon my arm, and he snapped the slide of his lantern shut, plunging us into darkness. We stood rigid, listening. The creak came again, nearer, then a soft footfall in the garret itself, and then in the pale wash of moonlight from the dormer I saw a figure move. A man, cautious and intent, making his way among the lumber toward the very chest beside which we stood concealed in shadow. Holmes let him come close. Then, in a single swift movement, he flung open his lantern full in the man's face, and I saw, blinking and aghast in the sudden glare, the sleek, florid countenance of Mr. Sebastian Ravensmere. For an instant no one spoke. The man's face worked with terror and calculation, His eyes darted to the empty chest, to Holmes, to me, and back again. Then, with a sudden snarl, he turned to flee, but I was upon him before he had taken 2 steps, and though he struggled with the strength of desperation, between us we bore him down and held him fast. "It is useless, Mr. Ravensmere," said Holmes, breathing hard but perfectly composed. "The game is played out. You have come, I do not doubt, to make certain that your brother's body lies where you left it, for you shifted it. Did you not, this very night or the last, having taken alarm at my inquiries? You are a cool and a clever man, but you have made the one error that clever men always make. You have done too much. Watson, is there a cord about? Let us secure our friend, and then I think he will be glad to tell us the whole truth, for it is his one remaining chance of mercy." But here I must record that the affair did not end so simply as this, and that Holmes, even in the moment of his triumph, was aware that a vital piece was still wanting. For when Sebastian Ravensmere, cornered and broken, at last found his tongue, it was not to confess to murder that he spoke, but to protest, with a vehemence that carried, to my ear at least, the ring of truth, that he had killed no one. "I moved him, yes, God forgive me, I moved the body," he gasped, when we had set him upon an old chair and Holmes stood over him, stern and pale in the lantern light. "But I did not kill him. I swear it upon my soul. I found him dead, and I was afraid, and I saw my chance, and I took it. But the killing was none of mine." "Explain yourself," said Holmes coldly, "and have a care that you speak the truth, for I shall know it if you lie." The wretched man wiped his brow with a shaking hand, and the story he told, there in that cold garret in the small hours of the morning, was this. He had, he confessed, been robbing his brother for years, falsifying the estate accounts, diverting rents, forging entries, and he had known that the new will, which would strip him of the management, would also expose his frauds and ruin him utterly. On the night of the 17th, he had lain awake in an agony of fear, knowing that the solicitor was to come in the morning. Sometime after 2 o'clock, unable to rest, he had crept up to his brother's rooms, meaning, he swore, only to plead with him once more, or perhaps to find and destroy some incriminating paper. He had found the bedchamber door ajar, and within he had found his brother dead. "He lay upon the floor beside the bed," said Sebastian, his voice sinking to a whisper, "in his night clothes, quite dead and already cooling. There was no wound that I could see, no blood, nothing. He might have died in his sleep of an apoplexy of his own grief, for all I knew. But I saw at once what it would mean. If he were found dead that morning, before the will was signed, why then the old will stood, and I was saved, for under the old will my brother's affairs remained in my hands until the boy came of full control, and I should have time to cover all. But if he were found to have died a natural death, there would be a doctor, an inquest, questions, delay, and I could not endure inquiry, for inquiry would uncover my frauds. And so, may heaven forgive me, I resolved to make him disappear. A vanished man is not a dead man. There is no body, no inquest, no examination of his affairs, only confusion and delay was all I needed. I burned certain papers of my own that lay in his study. I disarranged the bed. I turned the key from without with a strip of whalebone, to make it seem he had locked himself in. And then he shuddered. Then I bound the body, and I drew it up through the window to the roof, by the old hook, as you have guessed, and hid it in that chest, and smoothed the snow upon the sill behind me. All that I did. But I did not kill him. He was dead when I came. I found him dead. There was a silence in the garret. Holmes stood motionless, his brows knitted, his eyes fixed upon the trembling man with an intensity I had rarely seen in him. "Watson," he said at last, very quietly, "I believe he speaks the truth." I was astounded. But Holmes, if he did not kill his brother, then who did, and how? For if his lordship was already dead when this man came at 2 in the morning, dead of no visible wound, in a room whose door and window were both fast, then we are further from the beginning than we thought, said Holmes, and the true mystery is only now laid bare. This man is a thief, a forger, and a ghoul who used his brother's corpse to buy himself time, and for that he will answer to the law. But he is not the murderer. Someone reached the Lord of Kensington Square before ever Sebastian Ravensmere climbed those stairs. Someone killed him quietly, invisibly, and left him for another's guilty hands to hide. And that someone, Watson, is still at large beneath this roof. He turned once more to the shrinking figure on the chair. Where is the body now? In the ice house, whispered Sebastian, in the garden. When the detective came, I was afraid the roof and the chest would be searched, and I moved him down by night to the old ice house beneath the yew at the foot of the garden, where no one goes in winter. He lies there now. Then he shall be examined at last by one who knows how to read the language of the dead, said Holmes grimly. Watson, your professional skill will be needed before this night is out. Come. We conveyed the prisoner below and delivered him into the keeping of the astonished constable at the gate, with a message for Lestrade to be summoned with all speed. Then, by the light of the sinking moon, Holmes and I made our way down the long garden to the ice house, a low, half-sunken structure of brick beneath a great black yew, and there, in that cold and cavernous place, we found what we sought. I will not dwell upon the melancholy particulars. Suffice it to say that when the day had broken, and with Lestrade arrived and the proper authority obtained, I made such an examination of the body of the unhappy nobleman as the circumstances allowed. At first, I confess, I could find nothing. There was no wound, no mark of violence, no sign of strangulation or of a blow. The features were composed. The man might indeed have died in his sleep. I said as much to Holmes, who stood watching me with folded arms. Look again, Watson, said he. Look at the eyes. Look at the smallest of details. A death so quiet, so unmarked, that a frightened man mistook it for nature, and yet a death that came upon a man in the prime of his health, upon the very night before he was to sign away 3 fortunes. Such a death does not come by chance. Nature is being imitated, Watson, as she has been imitated all through this case. Look for the point where the imitation fails. Thus prompted, I examined the body with redoubled care, and at length I found it, a thing so small that only Holmes's warning had made me seek it. Upon the nobleman's scalp, hidden entirely within the thick gray hair at the back of the head, low down near the nape, was a single tiny puncture, no larger than might be made by a fine needle, surrounded by the faintest bruise. I should never have found it had I not been searching for the imperceptible. A needle, said I. Good heavens, Holmes, he was killed with a needle. With a fine, long needle, Watson, driven at the base of the skull, into the very seat of life. A death almost instantaneous, almost painless, and all but invisible to any but the most searching eye. It is a method known to certain of the criminal fraternities of the continent, and to certain students of anatomy. It requires knowledge, Watson, precise anatomical knowledge, and a steady, practiced hand. It requires, in short, someone who knew exactly where to strike. And it requires access to a man asleep, or drowsing in his bed, at some hour after Timson left him at 11, and before Sebastian found him dead at 2. Now we know the how. There remains only the who, and I think, Watson, that when we have asked ourselves who in that house possessed such knowledge, we shall not have far to seek. We returned, weary and chilled, to Baker Street as the gray morning broke, and Holmes flung himself into his chair and sat long in thought, his pipe between his teeth, while I dozed by the rekindled fire. When at last he spoke, it was as though he thought aloud. "Let us marshal what we know, Watson. His lordship was killed between 11 and 2 by a needle driven into the base of the brain, a method demanding anatomical skill. The door was not truly locked by him. That was Sebastian's later contrivance. The window's use and the smoothing of the snow were also Sebastian's, done after 2. Therefore the true murderer need not have entered by the window at all. The true murderer entered by the door, which stood ajar when Sebastian came, killed his lordship as he slept or drowsed, and departed, leaving the door open behind him, expecting, no doubt, that the death would be taken for natural, or that the body would be found in the morning by the servants. The murderer did not know that Sebastian, coming after, would seize upon the corpse to work his own separate deception. 2 guilty persons, Watson, working in ignorance of one another upon the same terrible night. The one a murderer who wished the death to be discovered, the other a thief who wished it to be hidden. It is the crossing of their 2 designs that has made this case appear so impossible. But who, Holmes? Who had the knowledge and the motive both? Motive we have found in 3, the son, the brother, and, if we are cynical, even the lady who was offered marriage and refused it. But the brother we have acquitted of the killing, though not of much else. The son, young Gerald, had the strongest motive of all, for the new will would have all but ruined him, and he had been heard to wish his father dead. But had he the knowledge? A young man of pleasure, sunk in gaming and debt, where should he have learned to drive a needle into the medulla oblongata with the precision of an anatomist? No, Watson. The motive fits the son, but the method does not. And when the motive and the method point to different persons, we must look for the person in whom they meet. Let us think. Who in that household possessed anatomical knowledge? I started up. Miss Fenn. She knows surely not. A gentle girl, gentleness, Watson, is no alibi. But let us not accuse where we cannot prove. What do we truly know of Miss Alice Fenn? That she is poor, alone in the world, and was to receive under the new will a settlement that would keep her from want all her days. Under the old will, the will that now stands, his lordship having died before the new could be signed, she receives nothing at all. Then she of all people had reason to wish the new will signed, not prevented. Her interest lay in his lordship's living another day, not in his death. So it would appear, said Holmes slowly. So it would appear. And that, Watson, is precisely what has troubled me from the first and troubles me still. For consider, everything in this case has been contrived to appear other than it is. The vanishing that was no vanishing. The suicide that was no suicide. The locked door that was not locked. The natural death that was no natural death. May it not be, my dear Watson, that the innocence which seems so plain upon the surface is itself but the last and subtlest of the appearances we have been invited to accept. I make no accusation. But I have learned, in this affair above all others, to distrust whatever is presented to me ready-made. There is a thread here I have not yet followed to its end. I must know more of Miss Fenn, of who she is and whence she came, and how she entered that household. Watson, I must ask you once more to labor on my behalf. Go again to Somerset House. Go to the agencies that place companions and governesses. Find me the history of Alice Fenn before she came to Kensington Square. And I shall make certain inquiries into the medical schools and the hospitals, and into a matter of anatomical instruction that begins to interest me exceedingly. For 2 days we pursued our separate researches, and it was on the evening of the second day that the threads came together in a manner as unexpected as it was, in the end, inevitable. I had returned from a long and dispiriting round of registry offices with little enough to show, when Holmes came in, his eyes alight with that cold fire which told me he had run his quarry to earth. "Sit down, Watson," said he. "Sit down and hear the end of it, for I have it now, every link of the chain. What did you learn of Miss Fenn's history?" "Very little, Holmes, and that little unhelpful. She was placed in the household through a respectable agency some 18 months ago, with references from a clergyman's family in the north. Before that, nothing. Her parents are dead. She seems to have come from nowhere." "From nowhere," said Holmes, "is precisely where I expected her to come, for the references, as I have ascertained by telegraph, are forgeries. The clergyman's family exists, but never employed nor recommended any Alice Fenn. The young woman entered that house under a false character, deliberately of set purpose, 18 months ago. Now attend to what I have discovered. There was, some years since, a surgeon of great skill and greater arrogance named Dr. Marcus Thorne, who was struck off the rolls and ruined, professionally and financially, through the agency of a certain nobleman who exposed a fraud he had practiced upon a wealthy patient. That nobleman, Watson, was Charles Ravensmere, the 4th Marquess of Ashfordly, Doctor. Thorne swore vengeance, was heard to swear it in open court, and then vanished from the sight of men. He had one child, a daughter, whom he had reared, it was said, with a strange and morbid devotion, and to whom, it was whispered, he had taught the secrets of his art, for he held that a woman's hand was steadier and finer than a man's. That daughter's name, Watson, was Alice. Alice Thorne. I sat thunderstruck. Then Miss Fenn, Alice Fenn, is Alice Thorne, the daughter of the ruined surgeon, and she came into the house of the man who had ruined her father under a false name and a false character, with a patience and a purpose that took 18 months to ripen. That is the person, Watson, in whom the motive and the method meet at last. The motive not of gain, but of vengeance, which is deeper and darker than any greed. And the method, the fine surgeon's needle, which her father taught her hand to guide. The settlement in the will, the tale of the refused proposal. These were her insurance, her cloak of innocence, prepared against the very day of discovery. Who would suspect the poor companion who stood to lose by her master's death? Yet she killed him, Watson, on the night before he could bind her to him with his bounty. Killed him coolly, with her father's art, and would have gone free and unsuspected had not the guilt of a second man, working blindly across her design, turned a quiet death into an impossible vanishing, and so drawn my attention to the very case she had taken such pains to make appear as nothing at all. I could scarcely find words. It is the most terrible thing I have ever heard. And yet, Holmes, can you prove it? A history, a false name, a motive, these are strong, but a jury shall have more than history, said Holmes. Come with me to Kensington, Watson, and bring your revolver. For I have laid a small trap, and I think that this night it will spring. It was full dark, and a fresh snow was beginning to fall, when we arrived once more at the great house in Kensington Square, where Lestrade and 2 constables awaited us by Holmes's arrangement, concealed within the hall. Holmes had, that afternoon, caused a message to be conveyed privately to Miss Fenn, a message purporting to come from Sebastian Ravensmere, now in custody, warning her that the needle mark upon the dead man's head had been found, and that she was suspected, and bidding her, if she valued her life, to remove and destroy the instrument before the police should search her chamber on the morrow. It was a stratagem of which Holmes himself did not wholly approve, for he liked not to bait a trap with deception. But the case, he said, admitted of no surer proof, and a murderess of such cold resolve must be met with resolution. We had not long to wait. From our place of concealment in the shadowed gallery above the hall, we watched, and presently a figure came noiselessly down the great staircase, a candle shaded in one hand, the slight, gray-clad figure of Alice Fenn. She moved with the quiet certainty of one who knew the house in darkness, and she made not for the door but for the great hall fireplace, where a fire yet smoldered. Kneeling before it, she drew from her bosom some small object, and made as if to thrust it deep among the embers. "Now, Watson," cried Holmes, and we came down upon her together, and Lestrade with his men from the shadows below. She sprang to her feet with a low cry, and for one instant I saw her face by the firelight, no longer sweet and sorrowful, but white and rigid, the eyes blazing with a hatred and a despair that I shall not soon forget. Then, seeing all lost, she stood suddenly still and quiet, and let the small bright thing fall from her fingers upon the hearth. A long, fine surgical needle, mounted in a slender handle of bone. "You are a clever man, Mr. Holmes," she said, in a voice grown suddenly hard and steady. "I knew when the detectives came that I had to do with no ordinary fool. Yes, it is mine. I killed him. I am glad I killed him. He ruined my father, drove him to his grave a broken and dishonored man, and thought no more of it than of crushing a fly beneath his heel. I waited 3 years. I learned to smile at him, to read to him, to let him love me. And on the night before he would have made me his pensioner, as though his money could buy back my father's name. I gave him the death my father taught me, quick and clean, which is more mercy than he showed to us. I ask no pardon. I would do it again." They led her away into the falling snow, and I have seldom in all my experience witnessed a scene of such cold and terrible dignity as that of the surgeon's daughter walking out between the constables, her head erect, into the winter night. She was tried, and, the plea of insanity being urged upon her behalf on the strength of that long and monstrous patience, was in the end confined during Her Majesty's pleasure rather than hanged. Sebastian Ravensmere was convicted of his frauds and of the gross indignity practiced upon his brother's body, and passed the remainder of his years in prison. The young Viscount, sobered and chastened by the shadow of the gallows that had for a while hung over him, for he was, until the truth came out, the man whom Lestrade would most gladly have arrested, succeeded to his title, and I am glad to record, to a wiser manner of life. It was some days afterward, as we sat once more before our fire in Baker Street, while the snow drove against the panes, that I put to Holmes the question that still lingered in my mind. "Holmes," said I, "there is one thing I cannot reconcile. You told me at the very outset that a locked room is not a mystery of physics, but of psychology, that someone had built us a puzzle, and that the shape of the puzzle would reveal the builder. Yet in the end, it was not the murderer who built the puzzle at all, but Sebastian, the thief who came after. How then did your principle serve you? Holmes smiled and reached for his pipe. It served me, Watson, precisely because it was true, though not in the way I first supposed. The puzzle of the vanishing was indeed built by a human hand for a human purpose. Only there were two hands and two purposes at work upon the same night, and it was their unlucky crossing that made the affair seem to defy nature. The lesson holds, Watson. Whenever we are confronted with the seemingly impossible, we may be certain that human design lies behind it. My error, and it was an instructive one, was in assuming that a single mind must be responsible for the whole. Nature abhors a coincidence, and so do I. Yet here was a thing very like coincidence, that two persons should conspire, unknown to each other, to conceal the same death. And yet, on reflection, it was no coincidence at all, but the working out of a single cause. The new will, Watson, that was the mainspring of everything. It was the will that gave the murderess her hour, for she struck the night before it could be signed. And it was the same will, and the same night, that drove the frightened thief to his brother's room in search of the papers that would ruin him. One cause, Watson, two guilty hearts, two crimes committed upon a single midnight, each in ignorance of the other. When you know the cause, the coincidence dissolves. It is only our ignorance that makes the world appear to be governed by chance. He was silent a moment, gazing into the fire. The saddest cases, Watson, are not those of greed. Greed, I understand. It is a common and a comprehensible thing. But that girl, reared from childhood to be the instrument of a dead man's vengeance, her whole youth poisoned at the root, her very tenderness turned into a weapon. There is a tragedy that no verdict can undo. Her father murdered her as surely as she murdered the Marquess. He only took longer about it and used a subtler needle. Ring for our supper, there's a good fellow. And put another log upon the fire. This is a night to be thankful for a warm hearth and an easy conscience. Two blessings, Watson, which that unhappy house in Kensington Square has taught me never again to hold too cheaply.